Good. Thank you for coming back and to stay with us, even more numerous than before the coffee break. Let me say that now I have to change my hat from the conductor to the moderator, because now it's time for our first panel that will explore one of the most debated aspects in the CBDC sector, I would say, that is the transaction validation and privacy implication. Just to frame a bit, what are we going to talk here at ADPS? We think and we believe that there is a huge discussion around the role of the different stakeholders that are involved in the transaction validation process in digital currency when a payment is operated. And according to the different design choices, different validation mechanism can be used, and also different privacy implication can emerge. The speech by Ananya before showed us, how the different technologies can be used and how can be interrelated between them. But many design choices we have can have impacts on aspects like threshold limitation of the CBDC in circulation, also implication about the offline solution. All those aspects have a profound implication on how personal data are processed by different actors in the management of a CBDC. And we see a huge impact on this for privacy enhancing technologies, and their adoption should be understood in deep. So to discuss these topics today, we have three distinguished speakers. The first one is Rakesh Arora. He is a solution architect in the FinTech research team at the Bank of Canada. We have Christian Grotov, professor of network security at the Bern University of Applied Science, researching on the future internet architectures. That is, by the way, here in presence, exceptionally. And Lars Huppel, chief evangelist at Giesecke & Drivent, that is a global company specialized in payments, connectivities, identities, and digital infrastructure. One message also for our audience that to me is very important. So please engage in our discussion. So please raise questions through our chat. That here my colleague Melanie remind always to say that you can find the Q&A functionality with the three dots you have on top right on the bottom right corner of the WebEx system. We will have 10 to 15 minutes dedicated at the end to that. So let's go to the juicy part of this panel. And my first question for our speaker is the following. So how do you see transaction validation in different architectural configuration of CBDC around the world? And moreover, what is the difference that you see in this if a bearer-based or an account-based solution is implemented? I would start from Rakesh, maybe, that I see on my screen, and then I will go to Christian and then to Lars. So Rakesh, please, 4 minutes.
Thanks, Stefano. Glad to be here. Just take a second to have a disclaimer that in this discussion, these views are my own views and don't necessarily represent those of the bank's governing council. So now to your question about architecture choices. We are looking at a lot of architecture choices that can be potentially used in a CBDC system. And we have categorized them as centralized, of course, where there's one system run by Canada, and then decentralized, which could be either public or private. Partition state, which represents the banking system or payment system today, where intermediaries kind of store the information about their customers, or the stored value, which is also known as token. So now there are these choices, and all of these choices comes with their benefits and some challenges. So we kind of look at them, and these are transaction processing architecture choices. so they have these cross-cutting concerns, which we use to evaluate these architecture choices. And these cross-cutting concerns are security, resilience, privacy, such as those. Now, if you kind of focus on privacy, and we look at there is surely going to be private data involved in the CBDC system, which we'll call private identifiable data, PII. So we need to basically build privacy from the beginning into these systems. And so the privacy is, involves a lot of things, and there's a lot of technology involved. It is what kind of data we collect, how do we minimize it, how do we use the data that we collect only for the purpose that we are collecting? Is there a proper consent? Are there proper access controls? Is the data protected properly using encryption techniques? So there's a lot of these technologies that are needed to do the data protection and provide proper level of handling of the data. But we can, when we look at CBDC, we can look at even going higher and using some of the technologies, emerging technologies known as privacy enhancing technologies, to see whether we can provide a very high level of privacy while doing the compliance and also ensuring that CBDC isn't used for illicit purposes. So this is the question that we are looking into, and seeing whether these technologies are feasible. There are many challenges, right? These are new technologies. There aren't many production systems that are using it at the moment. We think there are performance, scalability challenges. There are maturity challenges. There's a lot of momentum, though. Like, we do see that there is a lot of research going on. There are a lot of companies who are doing wonderful work in this area. So we're kind of looking at these technologies, trying to understand them, and see how those technologies can be used in the transaction processing part of CBDC and some other parts too, right? Whether that is user onboarding or whether that is data analytics, and basically looking at these technologies from these challenges and what advantages they can bring in.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. Very important point. Christian, floor to you.
Well, to begin with your architecture question, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. To begin with your architecture question, I mean, we're talking about a central bank digital currency. So on the organizational side, it's clearly going to be centralized, as the name central bank suggests. But of course, implementation-wise, when we look at where the hardware and where the servers are going to stand, it's going to be most likely distributed simply for resilience reasons. But that doesn't mean it's a blockchain. We can distribute databases. All the big tech companies have multiple data centers where they distribute their data across, and that still means it's a centralized organization, but the data will be stored in the process in a distributed way. I would also contrast here the term distributed with the term decentralized. Decentralized means any participant can be easily replaced by any other participant. And that's not going to be the case in a regulated environment. I mean, the whole point of the blockchain as invented by Bitcoin was to not be regulated. And as everybody has said today, well, we need to abide by some kind of regulation. With respect to the question, is it going to be bearer-based or account-based? Let's first define a little bit what we mean by this. When we talk about an account, I have some kind of access to my account, just like I would have access to some kind of token. But how much value is in the account depends on the history. How much money has gotten in, how much money has left the account. All right, so it's always tied to some kind of transaction history, which means I can link multiple events to each other. And this kind of linkability is in contrast to what we call anonymity. So you can't have good privacy if I can basically link together and string together your story of your life. Right? So accounts will never give us privacy because the inherent nature of an account is that it links information. Whereas a token is something I use once, like my ticket into my museum. Right? It's a token, I got it, I use it, it's gone. It's no longer valuable. It doesn't track any kind of history. Okay, the only history it has been used or not been used yet. Right? But it's no interesting history in that respect. Which brings me to the next point of the confusion with UTXO, because some people go and say, well, this is account-based, and some other people go and say, no, it's tokens. And the real answer is, well, if you look at a UTXO, it is an account because you see how much has been flowing in and how much has been flowing out, and you can charge it multiple times and then drain it multiple times. But of course, you could use it only once. You know, you only have one money flowing in and then one outgoing transaction to two new UTXOs. And then it's kind of like a token, except from a data protection point of view, it still links all of these transactions together. You know, so it's not like I can't trace some kind of flow. So in that respect, yes, there is a little bit of a token in there, but because it's a public transaction history, it is still not data protection friendly. So I think that answers the questions. I don't think we need a blockchain for a CBDC. We are not in a decentralized organizational mode. And I think if we want it with privacy, it must be token-based.
Thank you so much, Christian. Very, very clear messages. Lars.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Christian, for those comments. I think I agree with the vast majority of those. We also we are in full agreement that we do not think that there is a pressing need for using DLTs, also for the reason that you mentioned. It's a centralized governance model. And unless there is some kind of model where even the creation of tokens, that means that is the minting of tokens, is actually distributed across multiple participants, for example, in a model where commercial banks would be issuing their own money, then I think there could be some use of having a DLT technology there. But for more centralized governance, where only the central bank is the sole issuer of and steward of the entire ecosystem from a regulatory perspective, then we can totally use distributed databases, which also helps in tackling performance challenges. Because when we looked at the market for different blockchain solutions out there, we found that scaling them is quite challenging. And falling back even to simple SQL, they're not simple, those SQL databases these days, but like they're very mature. So I guess that goes back to the point that Rakesh made. Very mature databases can already offer some quite impressive performance numbers. Now, I would like to also go back on the point that Rakesh made, which is that privacy needs to be built into the system, and I also agree with that, which is why I would like to bring up a point about the kind of a model where data is being shared or even collected on a need-to-know basis, because I think that gets often confused and mixed up in the discussion. If you look at CBDCs across the world, we see three distinct layers. So the first layer is the layer of the actual technical transaction validation at that level, where we, for example, prevent double spending from happening, where we assume that, where we check that the UTXO has in fact only been spent once and not already spent twice or something like that. So on that level, I don't think we need any any personally identifying information. I think that's not necessary at that level. The second level would be the way that the user interaction works, right? So if I pull up, for example, my bank app and then I initiate a transaction, then of course there's some kind of data being collected. For example, my commercial bank might check my username and password, they might check my IP address, or they have any other kind of systems running on that just to ensure that I'm actually me trying to authorize the transaction. And then the third level is happening in a completely separate system altogether, where already carried out transactions are being analyzed and monitored, for example, to ensure regulatory compliance or taxation purposes and all sorts of these things. And my personal feeling is that, especially in account-based models, many of those layers get mixed up together, and that also means that private data could easily leak from one place to another. So what I would advocate for personally is to always keep this separation in mind, and every time you look at a particular CBDC technology stack, it should be made as clear as possible that all those layers are actually distinct, and it's not necessarily the case that data needs to cross those kinds of layers between those layers. And I think with that approach, we have already a very good situation, or a very good start for building privacy into the system.
Amazing. Thank you, Lars, for your view. And let me go to another question that we have for our speakers and Rakesh. let me come back to you specifically. In particular, you know, in the case where the amount of digital currency in circulation is limited by a threshold or a tier approach, you know, and other kind of privacy issues might end up and might be created by the chosen infrastructure. So my question here is for you, but also for the other speakers later, is how can those requirements be technically enforced? You know, at the same time respecting the privacy of different parties involved, and especially of the payers, sorry, in the process. Rakesh, floor to you, and then again to our speakers.
Yeah, thanks, Stefano. Yeah, so this is something that is very interesting, and is something that we call tiered onboarding, right? Where you know, and tiered onboarding is, you know, different level of compliance applies to basically based on what kind of controls and what kind of limitations are there on the funds, whether it is how much you can have it in your wallet, or whether how much you can to spend per transactions. There are many controls that can be used. Why do we need it? Because of universal access, right? Not everybody has the means to basically do the full KYC and go through that process, and also privacy. We think using tiered onboarding, we can provide a higher level of privacy. So for those two motivations, you know, this tiered privacy is important for a potential CBDC system. And so one of the challenges, there are many, the illicit usage is at the top. You know, if suppose we provide a total anonymous CBDC with a lot of controls, but still we have to be ensured that that it isn't used for illicit purposes. That goes without saying. So you know, just to give you an example, if it is account based and you know, we limit how much balance can be there on the account, say, you know, $1,000, just for the sake of discussion, then how do we prevent users from creating thousands of accounts, right? So those are the kind of challenges that we have. And then if we start introducing, you know, well, we're going to just collect your phone number, not go through the full KYC process, but just, you know, phone number, then how do we ensure that the privacy is provided to the users, right? So can we actually use some privacy enhancing techniques, whether they are zero knowledge proofs or blind signatures, to basically provide a high level of privacy and protect against illicit usage. So those are the things that are important for these kind of, you know, CBDC, which are tiered and have limitations and controls.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. This is a very important point because, you know, reconciling the accounts that a person might have in multiple intermediary in case of intermediate design choice will be chosen is very big question mark. I think we all have. Christian, to you.
Yeah, well, as just said, the natural place to impose limits is when people have accounts in the system. And somewhere, most CBDCs will have some kind of account, like where the money came from initially. But as I said before, with the accounts, you're not going to have good privacy. So at some point, you will want to convert the account-based money into tokens, in my view, if you want to be able to spend them privately, as we would advocate in the Thaler system, that you can spend privately, but not receive money privately. And so again, you can put the limits on the account interaction. So when I convert my account money to tokens, I can say you can only convert 100 euros, 1,000 euros a day. You know, I can similarly say if you receive money and it's an amount like $1 million, you know, well, then you need to tell me more about the person who paid you, right? So again, we can make this, whenever there's an interaction with an account where there's already a need to implement some KYC rule in the system, that's very easy where we can impose limits. Where it's difficult to impose limits is on token ownership, because if I have a token, you know, I can have 2 or 3 or 4, and they're not linked to me or to my identity if I want to have good privacy. And so I could hoard the tokens, and I know the central banks are concerned about token hoarding, but it's actually not that difficult to limit that too by simply saying, well, if I limit how much you can withdraw, and if I limit how long they are valid, well, guess what? The time how long they are valid times how much I can withdraw in a given time unit, that gives me an upper limit. So if I say you can only withdraw, whatever, 5,000 euros a month, and they're valid for 1 year, well, now I'm limited to 60,000 in tokens I can reasonably own. Right, so there are ways how we could limit token ownership by limiting token validity in combination with withdraw limits. And the other thing is, there's a natural limit too, because if we have a token-based system, which means that the user is in charge of their data, but also responsible for their data, and in particular responsible for loss of the tokens, they will probably want to limit their risk exposure. So token ownership is not riskless. Just like if I own physical cash, if I lose it, that's a problem, which is why some people keep their physical cash in bank vaults, but you're not going to have that many electronic vaults around that you want to trust with. So maybe you just keep some money in your bank account where it's kind of safer, right? So saying you have to assume the risk from owning the tokens will also put a psychological limit, a social limit on it, which means there is not as much of a need to limit token ownership anyway. Thank you.
Very interesting point, Christian. And so you link also the threshold and the ceiling not only to the owning of a CBDC, but also to the withdrawal and also to incentives and disincentives. That's very interesting. But let me go to Lars, and I'm sure have some points on this too.
Yes, I do. So I see a big problem with those time limits because as research suggests, is that any such kind of time limits, especially if they could be interpreted as kind of negative interest rates, could threaten the adoption of CBDC as a whole, because then consumers may not trust the entire system anymore. We see that already in the public debate on the topic of inflation, where people feel that central banks personally are devaluing their money, especially their cash. So we see this as obviously as one possible technical solution, but it's not sure to me if this is actually the best technical solution for that. So from our point of view, we also want to ensure that any kind of limits are not to be enforced centrally, because that obviously risks privacy of the entire system, also threatening adoption. So we kind of have like competing goals here. Instead, what you could also possibly do would be to enforce limits on the wallet level. So if the wallets are somehow certified, for example, if you have dedicated hardware wallets, or you have wallets that are stored in a data center in a commercial bank, then they obviously underlie, they have to obey regulatory rules. Then any kind of limits can be enforced on that level. And as I mentioned earlier, with this level distinction, when you check those and enforce those limits on the wallet level, then it's not even the case that the central bank must learn about those limits and if a particular limit check has succeeded or failed. Because then, for example, your commercial bank could just tell you, well, you can't do that. And it would not have to disclose that information to anyone else in the system. Could be both for sending and for receiving money. And there could even be different levels. So you could have, for example, a particular kind of wallet or account or token container, how you want to call it, for your child, where you set as a parent the limit on that. Or if you show your passport and you show your tax ID, then you can get an unlimited wallet because you're a merchant, for example, and all of these things can be implemented. And these policies can live directly in the hardware or in software on those different wallets. And that way we can also still ensure that kind of layer distinction. And it would not be the case that, for example, the merchant where you're trying to pay would learn that you can only use that money for like 10 euro a day or something like that. Either the transaction completes or it does not complete. And if it doesn't complete, it could also have been because you have insufficient balance. So yeah, I think the jury is still out on what is technologically the best solution here. But I think what's very clear is that user acceptance should be the biggest criteria here, because no matter what we're going to do, someone will not like it, either because your money expires or because there's some perceived privacy implications of other solutions. So I think this is well worth some additional research on that topic.
Very interesting. Thank you, Lars. We have another question for you speakers, and let me restart our tour de table from Rakesh, because we have the DPS, but we feel that is a very, again, a shared concern in the context of offline systems. So as we know, many CBDC applications are also observing on how to develop this kind of new instrument in offline with offline capabilities that might involve secure hardware solutions. So how does one avoid the possibility to create money or fake transaction as a problem, and on the other side also trying to respect at best privacy, implementing privacy enhancing technologies? So again, I start with you, Rakesh. 4 minutes again. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefano. Yeah, so offline is a big challenge. Our existing product, banknotes, provide a excellent offline functionality where two people can interact without any intermediary, without any network connection, internet connection. And why do we need it for CBDC, right? We think it's needed from a universal access point of view. It is needed from a resilience point of view. So offline, when I talk about offline, I mean two users or entities transacting without any intermediary and without any connection to the internet. They will have connection to each other. So like if they're using two devices. Now, so offline, to prevent double spending, because there are only two parties, it's a peer-to-peer transaction, as I said, without any intermediary, we need to use some kind of secure device to store those funds. So the feasibility of the device to securely store those is at the heart of it. Right? I mean, we have these phones these days, our electronic devices, lots of them have secure elements, tamper-resistant components in it. But, getting access to that is a challenge. So, the device manufacturers are very reluctant to give anyone else, access to those devices. So then, can we use these UADs with universal access devices, like in terms of either a card or something else that we can envision, which can have these secure elements, they're temper resistant, they have proven security that, they cannot be compromised, then we can kind of store those. The other challenge is because it's a peer-to-peer transaction without any intermediary, how do we do the compliance? So then that takes you to a situation where maybe some limits needs to be enforced on those transactions, so that these are small transactions. So that is how. Those are the things to consider. The other thing is, how do you reclaim if you lose your device? Because onboarding funds or depositing funds to these offline devices is possible and can be recorded and make sure that they are compliant. But once the funds are on the device and they are transacting between the devices, it's hard to see what the funds were if a device is lost, and provide an ability to recover that. So there are many challenges, but this is something that we think is needed for resilience and universal access, so that everybody can actually participate in the CBDC system. So kind of looking into that from a feasibility point of view at the moment.
Many open question, I think, Rakesh, for you at this point, but and also common to many other working on the field. Christian.
I find it always very problematic to hear the idea of we're going to do an offline capable CBDC for the purpose of inclusion. If it was truly about inclusion, why would you not just keep cash? You know, cash works very nicely and is extremely inclusively and works perfectly offline. Just don't replace it. Why create a competitor to cash? Why put further pressure on the existence of cash for the purpose of inclusion? You know, why do we talk about CBDC? It's because my monitor doesn't have a cash acceptor. I can't pay with cash online. But then I'm online. You know, the purpose for a digital currency is to do things in the digital world. We don't need one for the analog world. We have physical cash. We should keep it. It's the most inclusive, the most resilient form we have that works globally, is culturally understood. The idea of we need to have something for offline. If I meet you in person, I can give you cash. We should keep that. First point. Second point, just like Lars earlier, you know, advocating for these proprietary, closed, vendor-controlled solutions. You know, that's not going to give me informational self-determination. That's going to give me my wallet that's under somebody else's control. That already conflicts with me actually having good privacy. Because good privacy actually means I have informational self-determination, which means it's done with free and open source software that I can inspect and understand and change and adapt to my needs. And that's also good for inclusion if I can do that and can adapt the hardware to my needs and the software to my needs and understand it, which in the proprietary case, with closed, secure hardware, I cannot. So I'm very much against any of these solutions that are advocating for technology that's, again, certified, locked down, and where the users cannot adapt it to their needs. That is not what we're here to do if you're talking about privacy and informational self-determination. Now, the good news is doing secure hardware is very difficult. You know, I'm sure even Lars will confirm that, you know, doing it perfectly and cheaply is going to be a very, very difficult task. I always say if GND were to offer a secure hardware wallet, that's perfect. They should do that, and they should assume liability if something goes wrong. And if I'm able to hack their wallet and create $1 billion, it should be on their balance sheet afterwards. And in that case, I'm all for them rolling it out. I just tell central banks, don't roll it out themselves. Tell the hardware vendor, if you do this and you assume liability, be our guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Clear as always. Huh? And I think now the point is directly to Lars to answer also to Christian.
Yes, I understood the message loud and clear. So I would first like to start with one point that Rakesh made, though, which is the on the topic of peer-to-peer payments, which happen either online or offline. And we feel that also those peer-to-peer payments, which means maybe payment between friends, maybe over a distance or maybe locally, should also be as private as possible. So it's not always the case that any payment you make happens between a consumer or a merchant, so where there's some kind of taxation has to happen or some kind of compliance, but it could also just between two friends. So any CBDC solution should also keep that use case in mind. Now, moving on to Christian's first point, which is the clear distinction between the analog and the digital world. I think, as the keynote has made clear, we can be more ambitious with technological means. So we can try to come up with a technological solution that unifies both the advantages of cash and the advantages of any kind of e-money, be it deposit money or be it PayPal or be it something else entirely. And I feel like a point that has not come up yet is that physical cash handling is quite difficult also, and cash does not come without problems. So if you look at, especially in some emerging economies where mobile money is quite widely used, then we see that especially between rural and urban areas, there's a dramatic change in how, or there's a dramatic difference between how people use different payment instruments. So there, for example, moving cash from urban areas to rural areas is a big problem, and it's also very risky. And having a payment instrument that is maybe not 100% as private as cash, but like we can get quite close to it, but can also work both in online and offline scenarios. So it could potentially alleviate problems that they have with cash management. It could alleviate some problems that they have with mobile money, could give us quite some significant improvements in terms of financial inclusion. And maybe since, Christian, you brought up that point specifically about open source software and the capability to adapt and change the code, I have yet to see any sort of research on how open source software would actually improve financial inclusion, because in emerging economies there's big difficulties with even financial literacy. So we need some kind of payment instrument that is easy to use and which doesn't require a lot of explanation how to use it. And telling people to go study the source code and maybe adapt it to their own needs is, I think, not exactly productive in that case.
I said that for informational self-determination, not for inclusion. We need free software.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Thank you for specifying this, Christian, and thank you, Lars. One of the point actually that I would like to highlight from you is the fact that light banking is also another let me call it trend that we are seeing, where CBDC might interact and perhaps under the eye of Christian give a bit of self-sovereign payment systems in the ecosystem. But now we have time for questions, and I've seen my screen lighting many times, but I pass the floor to Melanie. Which are the main questions that came?
Thank you, Stefano. So we have two questions from the audience so far. One of them, Christine, I think you touched on on the first question, but it's from Alessandro, and it's: is it possible to enable programmable money without a blockchain infrastructure? And it's addressed to all the speakers, so whoever wants to answer.
I'm sure everybody will have the same answer, and it's of course possible, as long as you have digital signatures. You can sign whatever kind of digital things you want to do and associate some kind of program with it that should be run. The question is, how programmable do you want to have it? Do you want arbitrary people to submit code that then the central bank has to execute? Or do you want to have some rules on it? Do you want to have some legal constraints on it in terms of what happens when these smart contracts are attached to payments, but you don't need a DLT for it? You just need to have digital signatures, and we will have that in any kind of design. From anything I've ever seen for CBDC being discussed, blockchain or no blockchain makes no difference. Programmability will be possible. The question is, what kind of programs do we want to see or allow, or by whom?
Yeah, and I would also like to add another point on this, if I may, especially when we talk about a variety of form factors for CBDC wallets. For example, we don't just have some software in a data center that can execute those programmable features, but we could also want to, hypothetically, we could want to also put that on cheap smart cards, for example. And then we have a challenge, because if I were to submit some coins with some very complicated conditions attached to them, it will be quite challenging to actually execute that on those low-powered devices. So this will always be somehow problematic. If we want to have a payment instrument that works uniformly across the analog and the digital world, then it becomes quite hard to actually implement that uniformly in those form factors.
I would reinforce it. It's not just even that the hardware has to do it, but the user interface too. If I have a small device with a tiny screen, how can I actually communicate to the user what the smart contract is about to execute, even if I can computationally hack it? And if I have lots of different wallets, it becomes, of course, even harder to make sure that all of them support all of the relevant smart contracts. But this is nothing to do with blockchain. This applies to any technology below.
Rakesh.
Yeah, no, I think for any meaningful discussion about programmable money, we need to define what we mean by programmable money, right? I mean, answers from both the other panelists was clear, right? I mean, are we talking about, attaching conditions to the tokens? Is that programmable money? Are we asking, programmable money in terms of smart contract as we see in Ethereum world? Is that programmable? Or is it providing an API that basically can be used by others that is programmable, and all of those could be known as programmable money. Some of them are feasible, some of them are high risk because of how they can be exploited. So we'll have to kind of define what we mean by programmable money and what benefits it can provide to users. There are models where where we could basically there's an environment where basically it is open and innovations can be done on a platform, on a CBDC platform. That is something that is very exciting.
Thank you very much, Rakesh. Melanie, other questions from our audience?
We have one more question, which is there are full direct CBDCs already implemented around the world, and the question is, how can privacy be ensured in these solutions?
Who want to answer first? Maybe let's start from Christian or Rakesh. Yes, Rakesh, please.
Sure. Yeah. CBDC system isn't. There are many systems that collect private identifiable data, PII, right, and has a huge impact on the privacy of the users. So you need to basically design privacy from the beginning in these systems, and so we talked about during discussion about basic privacy technologies, right? And policies. What do you collect? How do you minimize what do you collect? Using that data for the purpose that it is being collected. Not sharing it with other entities without consent, protecting it using encryption and stuff. Right, so those are the technologies and that can be implemented in a CBDC system. But then then we also talked about using tiered CBDC systems, right? Whether this is total anonymous, where you can register as a guest without providing any personal information and acquire CBDC and transact it without leaving a trail. Have to be careful in implementing these systems that actually it is not pseudo-anonymous, but it is actually implemented properly. But then the point of privacy enhancing techniques, whether that is zero knowledge or blind signature or fully homomorphic encryptions, secure multi-party computation. So those are the techniques that are, we call it emerging technologies. They still, I think they still need to be proven in the marketplace for a critical system like CBDC, but there's a lot of momentum, and these can change the game for how privacy is implemented in the CBDC system.
Now I think it's for Christian.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that, of course, as he said, privacy has to be built into the system from the beginning, and adding it later on is usually not possible or doesn't work. I'm much more concerned with systems that are flexible, that want to be adapted to the ongoing changes in rules and regulation at any point in time. Basically, where the government can go and say, today we give you some privacy, tomorrow we'll change it. And of course, we will see governments that introduce systems where they start with some privacy, promise some privacy, we promise not to look at it. I mean, Facebook started with Libra saying, we're not going to look at the data, it's going to be in a separate company. And everybody said, ha, 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 we don't believe you, right? But the same thing can happen where the European Central Bank or the Canadian Central Bank says initially, yeah, we promise we will look at this, or we promise you will get up to 1,000 Canadian dollars in private transaction a day. And then the next government goes and says, no, we're going to lower that threshold from 1,000 to 50 to 0. And basically the problem then is the moment where you would need your privacy the most, because you now have a repressive government, is where the government can push a button and turn it off. And I believe privacy is a universal human right, something that is not only for Europeans that happen to have a good democratic liberal government. It should be for everyone, and it shouldn't be something we can turn off and adapt to regulation that changes and adapts to totalitarian regimes at the press of a button. You know, they should have to rebuild the entire system from scratch if they wanted. We shouldn't have turnkey totalitarianism prepared for them. So what we need is privacy by design from the beginning and not at all easy to disable or alter ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Lars, you want to add something?
I mean, to some extent, we have this sort of risk already in the world with cash, where governments across the world have completely different opinions on how much cash you should be using or how much cash you should be having. And also those rules are changing over time. So we see, for example, even in the Eurozone that there's quite different regulation on how cash should be used. And in the different countries, there's also quite a different culture about how cash is being used. So, I mean, to some extent, I agree that that any kind of CBDC technology stack should have this privacy by design that cannot easily be circumvented. But we also need to face the regulatory clarity aspect that was mentioned and kind of the realities of that the central banks and the government will always be able to exert some control over that. And if you are if you basically believe that there should be completely free, that the way you do payments should be completely free of government influence, then presumably the only thing that you have left would be to use some kind of zero knowledge based or similar cryptocurrency for that.
Thank you, Lars. We have time for one very last question, Melanie. I see it's a very long question, but I need to leave 1 minute for the answers. But please, Melanie.
So the question is, are you aware of any peer-to-peer system that could also be subject to a non-real-time compliance check using privacy-enhancing technologies or PETs?
Who wants to start?
I think you might want to look at Platypus, but it's not really deployed, but it has some kind of peer-to-peer capabilities that can be subject to compliance checks. So I think that might be partially the answer the person is looking for.
It's a system that you have developed at the Berlin University, right?
No, it's not my system. I think it's some German researchers.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, yeah. Lars or Markus?
Unfortunately, I'm unaware of any such system. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the question was whether any system that has been deployed, right? I mean, there are a lot of proposals. There are a lot of research. There are even some implementations, but they are not at a stage where they've been fully tested or they have solved all the issues with compliance. Like so like Zcash, which is a offshoot of blockchain, where they have used zero knowledge proof to do that. And they have some keys that can be used to actually look at the shielded transactions. But those keys, how do you manage those keys? Who have visibility to those keys? For every transaction, is it feasible to give those keys to the regulators? When there are millions and millions of transactions. So there are many challenges. In systems like that, I don't think there is one that has solved all the issues or one that has been tested and vouched. Yeah, but they are at the research stage, I will say.
I might add, especially if a system that is doing offline transactions and enabling offline transactions to be continuously done, where the systems never ever go online again, how can you do any kind of proper compliance where you're supposed to report income or limit amounts if I just can keep cycling money offline on the system and never an authority gets control of it? I think that's the problem that's very hard to solve. Whereas if you go and say, we do have online intermediaries that can intermediate transactions and look at them at certain points, then you can easily follow the regulations. And that's what we would recommend for our TALA system, for example. We're simply saying, yes, you can do transactions, but every time the recipient is intermediated by an online entity. If you keep it offline and want to have even reasonable levels of regulation on it, it's going to be very, very hard.
Thank you so much, Christian, for this last word, and same for Rakesh, same for Lars. I think we are perfectly on time. Thank you once more, especially for this. As I said, I was thinking to be a very hard timekeeper, but you were absolutely do not need any kind of enforcement on this sense. Let me release a bit also our participants that are staying with us so hardly for 10 minutes coffee break. We will reconvene at 4:30 for the second panel. See you in a while.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.